I want to remind us today that even though this is a podcast about adoption and foster care, that your identity is not found in that calling, right?
Yeah.
You are not who you are because you are a foster parent or because you are an adoptive parent. It is part of how God is guiding you through this journey of making you who you are, of sanctifying you and calling you closer to Himself and a relationship with Him, but it is not who you are. And so I think that's important as we talk about you're not too late, because sometimes we hurry up because we're trying to either prove to ourselves or proving to others in our lives that we got to get there in order to be this, do this, or to even proclaim that the Lord did it. So let's
Mm.
dive into just a little bit of your heart for this book in terms of, what really inspired you to communicate this message at this time.
Yeah, yeah. I can remember initially when I started dreaming about this. At first, I thought it might be a book on singleness
Mm,
because you've heard these stories. Summer, I was a bridesmaid 12 times before I married Dustin. I had just gone through a really prolonged season in my 20s of marrying off all of my people, planning their baby showers, their bachelorette parties, all of those things. So I just felt like I had a lot to say to single women in their 20s and 30s who were navigating that and feeling like, are there any men out there who love the Lord, and just navigating that longing that is God given, right?
yeah.
And so as I reflected on that though, and talked to other women in my life and just asked them to pray about whatever this next book would become, I realized that longing for me didn't end when I married Dustin. Right.
Yeah.
It actually just now looks different
Yeah.
than it did when I was single. And so there's this line in the book that I come back to of longing leads to more longing. So
Yeah.
whether, and you kind of touched on this a minute ago, whether it is, you have children, but then you felt this call to adopt. And so now there's this new thing stirring in your heart that you don't know what to do with, or maybe you're a mama of multiple children and you are growing in this area of your career and there's this tension that exists there. It can look a million different ways, but I began to discover that it was bigger than just singleness. It truly was this thing of longing. And I mean, I've dealt with it my whole life. And I think in a broken world, until we meet Jesus, we are going to experience and have to navigate trusting in God for something for the rest of our days. And so many times those are kind of those imperfect glimpses at what our heart ultimately longs for, which is the perfection of all things. And we'll get to experience that one day, praise God. But my heart really is, what do we do with that until then, you know?
Right. Absolutely. And I love that you share that. I think it's a great point to say longing leads to longing, because we in our minds, we convince ourselves, well, once I achieve this, or once I receive this, or once I get to this point, then that longing is going to cease. But you're right. There is always something on the other side of that. What is the heart behind that? Why do we do that, Rebecca?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think if we zoom out at a bigger picture of what God is doing, and I shared kind of the end of the story a moment ago, but if we zoom out to share kind of the beginning of it, we are not living in a world as it once was in the garden, as God
Right.
created it, in
Yeah.
perfect fellowship and communion with Him, that was severed because of sin. Right. So now, on the other side of Jesus's life and ministry, He came to make a way to restore our relationship with God. And so, because of salvation, we live in that reality of kind of a now and not yet. I call it living between two Edens in the book. And so, that's where we are today, awaiting that future restoration and redemption of all things. And so, I think number one, that's the spiritual reality that exists. And then culturally, we are moving at a faster pace than we ever have before. I think about even the temptations that our generation has versus, let's say, my mom or my grandmother. They don't, neither of them have social media. Neither of them, are plagued by scrolling on their phones and seeing how many children this friend from high school has, or
Right.
where so and so friend from 20 years ago went on vacation when maybe they don't have the budget to this year.
Right.
Those types of things that we're just surrounded by
Yeah.
choice, by the way,
Yes.
all day, all day long, every day. And so I think that exists. And accompanying that, our lives have more ease and a quicker pace than they ever have before. So, a couple examples, let's say we have an early flight in the morning and we don't want to inconvenience our husband or a friend. We just call an Uber and they're at our house in 15 minutes. If we're sick and we want, chicken noodle soup, a friend doesn't bring it to us, we DoorDash it from Panera and it's at our house in half an hour. And so what I believe that's done is it's trained our hearts, even in the insignificant things of life, to expect them quickly and really not to have a whole lot of resilience to wait. So then again, if I zoom out, it should be no surprise to us that it is harder and harder for us to do it in the more significant, more vulnerable, more challenging seasons of life and growth, spiritually speaking,
Yeah.
because we don't even do it when we're hungry, right?
Yeah.
So I think all of that has led us to this place of it being really challenging to trust in God's timing.